Hey, everybody, Jen Hatmaker here, your host of the For the Love podcast. You guys, welcome to the show. We do a holiday series every year, and the team and I, when we were brainstorming this really almost a year ago, we were like, let's just mix it up a little. Let's come at this from an unexpected angle. Let's talk about some of the untraditional delights and joys of Christmas, or let's just think of it in new kind of fresh ways. And so we just decided to shake it up. So obviously we can't have a strong conversation around Christmas without talking about traditions. They just kind of go hand in hand. But to really understand why any of us are subverting these traditions, which we're talking about over the course of this whole series, doing something new, doing something different, doing something unexpected, I think we first need to go back to the history of where they came from in the first place. You know what I mean? Like, why eggnog? Like, why a fat man in a red suit? What's figgy pudding? Like, how did any of this come from, and how did we even end up here? Now, if you're a longtime listener, you know we tend to be pretty female-centric here on the show, but every once in a while, we sneak a dude in. And lucky for him, Brian Earl gets to be our guest today to talk about all things Christmas traditions. So you guys, I recently came across Brian's podcast. It's called Christmas Past, which we're going to talk about. You're going to love to hear kind of the origin story here. And essentially, it's like Christmas in PR. He is a master storyteller, a skill set he did not even know that he had. And honestly, his show in itself might be a new tradition for me because it's so fascinating and interesting to listen to while I wrap gifts for 15 years, right? We don't have to be bored while we do it, people. Brian's got tons of thoughtful research, a very dynamic delivery, which you'll see. And he makes it even more fun and kind of adds this new layer of kind of magic and knowledge, understanding and wonder to the holiday season. So his show is now in its 7th season, and it has a worldwide audience. And it's grown to that. So we talk about that very first year and then how it began to change. Brian actually has the highest rated and most popular podcast about Christmas. All right. And so obviously we wanted to have him on in our series. So also, fun fact, and I think he mentions this in our interview, actually, he generally puts up his tree on Halloween and he takes it down on Valentine's Day. I can get behind this. All right. I can so get behind this kind of enthusiasm. I don't know if you remember this, but I hired someone to decorate for me last year, and it was revolutionary. I don't know if I can ever be as dedicated to the season as Brian is. I frankly don't know if anybody can, but I do have mad respect for his game. Oh, and also fun news. As his star continued to rise and his podcast continued to get more and more delighted listeners and attention, he now has a book coming out about all the fascinating, sometimes really surprising stories behind our holiday traditions, why we should care about them and what they mean. I loved this. I could have asked him 20 billion more questions. But all this is so interesting. It's such a neat deep dive into what we do during Christmas and why we do it. And so I think you're going to love this, you guys. You're going to for sure love him. And you're going to for sure want to go over to his podcast, Christmas Past, and hit that subscribe button. So you guys, please enjoy my conversation with the wonderful Brian Earl of the Christmas Past podcast. Brian, welcome so much to the For the Love podcast. Delighted to meet you.
Oh, well, thank you for having me on. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. I don't know what your answers to my questions are going to be, but I can't wait to hear what you have to say. Your niche area of expertise here is so specific. You've really carved out your own little path. So before we kind of get into all of this, will you just tell my listeners, and I've already high-leveled for them kind of who you are, of course, but where you are, where do you live, who is with you, who are your people, what's your deal? What's your deal? And then we'll get into your awesome podcast.
Okay, well, thanks. So I am I grew up in New England in a town called Stoughton, Massachusetts, but I moved out to Silicon Valley. Let's see, that was back in 2014 to pursue a career opportunity. Been out here ever since. The idea at the time was we'll stay for a year and see if we
Yeah.
like it. If not, we can always go back to Massachusetts. But here we are now. What is it? Eight years later, and
Yeah.
so we've planted roots. So we finally bought a house, and it looks like we're not going anywhere for a while. So it's my
Uh-huh.
wife and me, and I am an older guy, but I have a 2-year-old child. So it's
Uh-huh.
the three of us. Yeah,
Uh-huh. Man, you've got a 2-year-old running around. You are in the weeds. Like
I sure am.
that's no joke. That's like sometimes fall asleep in your clothes at night in your bed.
It is, and
Uh-huh.
having a 2-year-old while we're all stuck at home. He was born
Oh
during the
yeah.
pandemic. He
Yeah.
was born within a couple of weeks of us buying a home,
Oh
and then
gosh.
he was born, and then everyone was stuck at home. And it's still the case now, where I work from
Yeah.
home, my wife works from home. We have a nanny for the kid. I made sure that they got out of the house this morning before we
Yeah.
started this. It's all of those kinds of logistics. It's just every day, and then
Totally.
you're right, by 7 o'clock at night, I'm ready for bed.
Oh my.
Mm.
Okay, Brian, let's go back to the beginning here. So you're the Christmas guy. This is your deal. I would like to hear first what your Christmases were like as a kid, um, and how that sort of impacted your fascination, not just with the holiday, but its history. Let's start there. What kind of Christmas kid were you?
Sure. Well, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. I was born in 1974. So my childhood was pretty evenly
Same.
split between the 70s and the 80s. And I
Yep.
consider myself very grateful for that fact. Those are two
Mm.
decades that I feel like produced maybe twice their fair share of popular culture. And all of
Ah,
that worked its way into Christmas. I mean, just even the nostalgic gifts that we would have gotten, the Rubik's Cube, the Teddy Ruxpin, you can go on
sure.
YouTube and go down a rabbit hole where they have hours and hours of these nostalgic television commercials, the old Toys R Us commercials. You can watch compilations of those. I don't really know if any other decade since has produced a
Mm.
kind of nostalgic pop culture at that level when it comes to Christmas. But more than that, I grew up as a family in a family of five. I'm one of five kids. My mom is one of six. My dad was one of five. I have
Oh,
lots
yeah.
of cousins, and all of us
Yeah.
lived within a 10-minute drive of one another. And more than that, I grew up on a
Wow.
cul-de-sac with a bunch of kids. So I was just surrounded and immersed by just lots of people my age. And Christmases felt very heavily populated, I guess would be one way
Oh,
to
yeah.
describe that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Some of my fondest memories of Christmas were packing into my grandparents' very, very small house, very tiny. And it
Mm.
would just be sometimes just, nowhere to sit, but we'd all just be packed in there and there'd be a fire and we'd be singing Christmas carols. And we had this odd tradition that after we opened our presents, we would crumple up the wrapping paper and have a kind of a mock indoor snowball fight. And that was
Oh,
just kind
that
of
is
the grand
fun.
finale of our Christmas celebrations. So and again, all of this was in New England. And back in those days, it was not uncommon to have snow either, at least on the ground at Christmas or snow on Christmas Day itself. Things have
Mm.
really changed in the meantime. I mean, I think the last time I was in New England, which was a couple of years ago, it was like in the 60s on Christmas Day. So
Mm.
things have shifted, but those old school New England white Christmases were very much
Sure.
a thing for me. So it was all of that. And then in addition was my mom, who was a
Mm.
very, very crafty person.
Okay.
And a lot of our decor for Christmas were things that she made. She had an old school sewing table. I don't know if you know these ones from the 60s or 70s, where it was a table with the sewing machine inside and you would flip it
Oh,
upward.
do I? I know exactly what you're talking about. My mom had one. My grandma had them. Of
Mhm.
course.
And she also had this huge box of thread. It almost looked like a toolbox, but it would be
Yeah.
different kinds of thread and needles. And she'd always be there making things. And the Christmas stockings that we had, they were all the same size and they were personalized for each of the five kids. I still have mine.
Do you?
It's in a closet behind me. I put it out every year. I tried to recreate one when I started dating my wife. I made one for her
Mm.
and made one for my baby son. Those are all matching. So that's a nice way that I'm trying to continue all of that.
Hmm.
Um, but almost all of our decor was stuff that she made. And so, it exists now. Either it was separated among my siblings when we all went off on our own. We each took little pieces of it. And then some of it, we don't quite know where it is, but it lives
Yeah.
on in those photos that my mom took. And that was the other great thing is my mom was and is kind of this great curator and archivist of our family history, where
Mm.
she would take all these photographs on, I don't know if you remember the old Kodak Extralight cameras, the kind,
Yeah.
you'd have to snap a picture and then ratchet the film, and then you
Sure.
take it to that developing place in the grocery store parking lot. Remember those kiosks?
Absolutely.
And the images, they're always square. The photos were
Mm.
square, and they had like a linen texture finish. And on the back, she would fill the entire back space writing all these details about
Oh, that's so
when the
great.
photo was taken and
Mm.
all that. And so all of our Christmases are documented in that way, and additionally, just all of the I don't know, little archival pieces of Christmas that we have taken with us, are just part of the things that I remember. And so one of my favorite decorations that she made was this Advent calendar, where she made it with like a large piece of burlap, and each date of the calendar was this little item like a church or a bell or an angel or something that she made by hand with felt. And every day during the Advent season, you would take a piece off of the calendar and move it up onto this Christmas tree that was at the top of
Yeah.
the calendar. Well, anyway, I didn't get to take that with me when I moved. I got
Mm.
all of the LPs, the Christmas record, to those blow
Yeah.
mold Santas that light up from inside. My brother got the advent calendar, and I've always been jealous of him for that. And I
Yeah.
said, oh gosh, I'd really love for baby Dashiell to have something like that.
Mm.
And so this year she sent me one. She recreated it, and it's like a
Mm.
perfect replica, and I'll get to carry on that tradition with my son. So yeah, that
Ah,
growing up, Christmas, it just felt very very close with a lot of people, and a lot of people present, and just this personal touch that my mom put on it that just you couldn't have bought from a store. It was stuff that she made and wanted to do every
mm.
year. She made these stained glass cookies. I don't know if you've ever seen those. The sugar cookies where you cut the middle out and you put crushed up candy, like
Sure. And then
lollipops.
melt it in the
You bake
oven.
those,
Uh-huh.
melt
Yeah.
those, put those on the Christmas tree so the light shines through.
Mm.
She would also make a gingerbread house from this recipe that she got. I think it was out of like McCall or Woman's Day
Sure.
magazine, and made a template for the different pieces that she cut out of a brown paper bag. And she kept
Mm.
that same recipe and that same brown paper bag so that it would be consistent every year. And we decorated all
Okay.
together. And I think that would happen right around Thanksgiving. And the
Mm-hmm.
rule was we couldn't touch it until Christmas Day. And on Christmas Day,
Yep.
I mean, everything was stale and gross, but we didn't care. We just, were
Uh-huh.
on that thing. And then again, like last year, she kept that all those years, that template and that recipe, and
Mm.
sent them to me so that I could have them. And I
Wow.
honestly don't know where she got the discipline to keep all of those things, because as with a 2-year-old now, like I can't get rid of things fast enough. I am
Absolutely.
constantly battling clutter. She
Yeah.
was somehow able to just, figure out what are the things that you want to keep, what's
Mm.
important, and then just be able to, one day, 40 something years later, be able
Yeah.
to share those with me so that I could carry on the tradition.
That is amazing. I can't believe she sent you the actual brown paper bag pieces.
Hmm.
That's just crazy. I mean, she kept up with that for almost 50 years. I feel like I have lost almost whole children, right? Like that just feels like an impossible feat. That is okay. So I love hearing that because now I'm understanding where your Christmas sentimentality comes from.
Hmm.
This was baked into your childhood. This was like your own family like value system to really like honor and prioritize traditions and Christmas and the season and feel like it's this is getting clearer for me.
Hmm.
And so now knowing that this was the foundation that you sort of launched out of, at what point, having progressed through what steps in your own personal like discovery and research or whatever, did you think, you know what I need? I need a Christmas podcast. I'd like to hear about the vision
Hmm.
behind it, why this even is a thing, why this came to be,
Hmm.
and then what it's been like for you.
Sure. So what happened was this was back in September of 2015. And, I'm the kind of person I put up the Christmas tree sometimes right on Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
Although probably not this year because Baby Dashiell is very climby and grabby. So
Oh,
we might have to
yes.
change that up a bit.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
but normally I try to extend the Christmas season as far as social norms allow. And even so, I still get burnout, right? I don't want to have too much of a good thing too soon. But
Uh-huh.
right around September is when I'm starting to think, yeah, I'm getting ready for Christmas. And I
Yeah.
wanted to ease into it in kind of a low key way. I wasn't quite
Okay.
ready for, music or movies or anything like that. And so I said, I wonder if there's a good Christmas podcast. And most of the
Yeah.
podcasts I like are, NPR style ones.
Sure.
And what I like is that how they can have these nerdy deep dives where they can take almost any topic, like the history of the paper cup or something, and
Totally.
just make it sound like, oh my God, that's the most interesting thing I've heard today. I said, I wonder if that exists for
Mm.
Christmas. And at the time, there were, I think, like 5 Christmas podcasts. There was one called The
Wow.
Christmas Stocking with this
Uh-huh.
DJ named Lee Cameron. It's still one of the best ones out there, even though he doesn't put out new episodes. And then a couple where it was a church that put out their Christmas sermon as a podcast, and a
Okay.
few that were just, playlist of Christmas music. There's not a lot to choose from.
Wow.
And so I said, well, okay, this thing that I wanted didn't exist. I think I'm gonna give it a go. I'm gonna
Mm.
try my hand at creating that. So it was never like, oh, hey, everyone has a podcast. I'll have one too. What should it be
Uh-huh.
about? Or, hey, I'd love to start a Christmas podcast. It was more like I went looking for this thing that didn't exist, and
Mm.
when it didn't, I said, I'm going to give it a shot.
Yeah.
And the vision was it would be what would it sound like if NPR had a Christmas podcast? And
Perfect
so
description.
most
Hmm.
podcasts are either, a long interview like the one we're doing now,
Hmm.
or 3 people discussing movie, that kind of
Hmm.
roundtable
Sure.
format. But the vision that I had was really more like I would take a Christmas topic, find the absolute top subject matter expert I could find,
Yeah.
do an interview, and then try to produce and script it in a way that you might think that you're listening to some kind of NPR style news piece.
Got it.
And so I had never done anything like this before. I'm a
Hmm.
software designer. I have no
Yeah.
radio background. I have no storytelling abilities that I
Hmm.
knew of at the time. It was really just I was going to do a bad impression of NPR,
Okay.
come what may. And
Yeah.
so that first year, I put out about a dozen episodes, thinking, "Yeah, we'll see how this goes." Right?
Yeah.
It was a lot of work. So that first year, I said, "Okay, look, there are only a couple Christmas podcasts. These aren't even on people's radar. I don't even know how people are going to
Totally.
find me, but I'm going to throw it out there and see what happens." And the first year, I guess I would say I was surprised by how well it did, even
Hmm.
though it was a modest success at best. The next year is when I just said, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
I can't believe the response that this is getting through word of mouth and and the kinds of people I was getting responses from.
Hmm.
And for the reasons they were reaching out. I was getting requests from museum curators to use audio of the podcast in their
Ah,
displays. I was getting
interesting.
outreach from college professors saying that they were playing my podcast in class as an example of good storytelling.
So
Just things like
good.
that, where it's like, what is going on here? And then within a couple of years, I was getting invited to speak at conferences and
Yeah.
things like that. And all of that culminated last year, where I signed a book deal. So my book is
It's
coming out
amazing.
this year, and it's just an extension of the podcast.
That's so amazing. I'm so excited for you. I
Thank you.
love that because you came into it simply and not with my ambition is to start here and end with a book. You just started putting excellence into it. You just decided whoever and however many people were listening, you were going to make it amazing. You were going to put all your energy into it. You were not going to cut corners. You were going to craft an experience that they're going to hear. And it just, the cream like kind of rose to the top.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I'm playing for the love of the game, and I don't really have
Yeah.
any ambitions other than to just see what's next. So
Mm.
it was last year that the audience got to a point where I'm like, okay, I'm ready to graduate to the next thing, whatever that
Mm.
happens to be. And so again, it was with the same way, in the same way that as I started the podcast, I had no expectations. I said, well, maybe a
Yeah.
book. I don't know. I'll put together a proposal and see if anyone's interested. And then, to my surprise, somebody was. And so this will be
Yes.
a print book and an audio book. So I narrated the audio book back in May. So I'm excited for that too.
Uh-huh.
But the project has always been largely, for me, it was number one, a way that I could just really deepen my appreciation for Christmas. You
Okay.
get to a certain age where you're like, well, what's next? With, I love Christmas, but after a while, it's the same thing every year. And like,
Yeah.
what can I do to kind of expand my own little Christmas spirit palette? And then secondarily, it's a creative project, and so it's always about, well, how can I improve the creation?
Mm.
And the enjoyment really comes from the act of creation. So even if no one
Yes.
listened, I'd still be doing it
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
love to do it. And I love that I've created something that didn't exist before.
Yeah, I love it so much. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. Unfortunately, life doesn't come with a user manual, and I know it's not fair. So when things go sideways, when something breaks, when stuff just isn't adding up or working, it's hard to know what to do next, which lever to pull, or how to keep moving forward. It's normal to feel stuck. But therapists are trained to help you figure out the cause of challenging emotions and learn productive coping skills, which makes therapy like BetterHelp the closest thing to a guided tour of the complex engine called you. BetterHelp has connected more than 3 million people with licensed therapists. It's convenient, secure, accessible anywhere because it's 100% online. You get matched with a therapist after filling out a brief survey, and you can switch therapists at any time if something's just not working out. I discovered firsthand how powerful online therapy was in my own life when my marriage imploded. But even in life's less earth-shattering challenges, it's healthy and wise to have the discipline of professional therapy in your life. So you guys get unstuck and get on your way to being your best self with BetterHelp. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/forthelove. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/forthelove. So we're talking with Brian Earl today all about Christmas traditions, and 'tis the season, right? Some of our traditions for the holidays, for better or worse, probably involve shopping and gift giving. But here's something we should all know and remember. Happiness is in all the things that money can't really buy. That's just real. Like peace of mind, like not worrying about your money, which to me sure feels close to happiness. That's where Chime can help you smile more. They were just named the #1 most loved banking app. With payday up to 2 days early, fee-free overdrafts up to $200, they just offer financial peace of mind for your wallet. And all of that with no annual fees, large security deposits, or credit checks to apply. So see for yourself why Chime is so loved at chime.com/forthelove. So that's chime.com/forthelove. Chime is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services and debit card provided by the Bancorp Bank or Stride Bank N.A., members FDIC. Early access to direct deposit funds depends on payer. SpotMe eligibility requirements and overdraft limits apply. See chime.com/spotme. Chime was the 2021 #1 most downloaded banking app in the U.S. according to Apptopia. Let's get down to brass tacks here.
Yeah.
Because you have now, by virtue of the show, you have had so many fascinating conversations. You've learned so many things. You've discovered all sorts of interesting history and real life stuff wrapped around some of our traditions. So let's dive in to just a couple. I'm just going to throw it out there, dealer's choice here.
Okay.
Of maybe a couple of our main Christmas traditions that feel kind of ubiquitous to Americans, if you will, and what kind of the fascinating stories behind them, whatever couple you want to talk about.
Sure. Maybe we can start with Christmas trees.
Yeah,
And
let's
then we
start
can
there.
go and yeah, it's the way that you frame that these are these ubiquitous traditions. That's part of the reason I wanted to start the show is because, you get to a certain point where you've celebrated the same Christmas your whole life. I mean, it sounds like an obvious thing to say, but if you celebrate Christmas, you've probably always celebrated it. And so these things that we do that are just very odd feel
Mm.
really normal to us just because
Right,
we've
like put a
always done
tree
it
inside our
every year.
house.
Put a
It's
tree in the
weird.
living room.
Yeah,
Sure,
yeah,
why not, right? But why, right?
yeah.
And two of the most common themes that come up in the show, like in a lot of the traditions. Number one is that there's just a very interesting story behind it, and number two, it's probably newer than you think.
Hmm.
Christmas has its roots in this 2,000 plus year old religious story. It's filled with all kinds of ancient traditions, but about at least half, and probably more than half, of the way that you experience Christmas
Hmm.
was created in the last several decades. I mean,
Okay.
and part of that's obvious when you think about, the Christmas, the classic Christmas music of the 40s. I mean, that was all written when my mom was growing up.
It's true.
Um, but a great deal of the remainder isn't much older than that. And so you think about the Christmas tree, okay, that must have come from, and your favorite internet know-it-all will tell you, well, that's actually a pagan tradition. Well,
Hmm.
I mean, sort of. It does have its roots in pre-Christian practices of what's called
Uh-huh.
tree veneration, where trees were believed to have a spirit in them.
Okay.
So the oak tree had Thor. It was associated with the god Thor. And it was even not uncommon to have ritualistic sacrifices to the god Thor near an oak tree in the village. And so around the time of the Protestant Reformation, you have
Hmm.
these missions going through Europe to convert the heathens, if you like.
Hmm.
And there was one named St. Boniface who came to this region in Germany. And the legend goes, and it's almost certainly is only a legend,
Hmm.
that he happened upon this village that was about to do one of these ritualistic sacrifices. And as the hammer came up to do the sacrifice, he stopped it in mid-action, chopped down the tree, said, okay, take that tree and use it to build a chapel of some kind. And then behind it was standing a fir tree. And he's like, there,
Okay.
that's your new tree. Now that you've
Hmm.
converted to Christianity, use that fir tree. Whatever the real story is, the,
Hmm.
the the origin of the Christmas tree is probably that it's a pre-Christian tradition that as Christianity traveled through Europe, it
Yeah.
just kind of stuck. People just
Yeah.
didn't get rid of it. Even so, up until very recently, I mean, like the 19th century,
Hmm.
there were a million different Christmases. It was very regionalized. And you have to imagine
Hmm.
there was no mass communication, there was no mass
That's
media,
true.
no way
Yeah.
to really communicate what people were doing in other parts. So the Christmas tree was really a localized German tradition that got brought to America with German immigrants. And right around the same time, it's about 1850, was popularized by Queen Victoria.
Okay.
Her husband, Prince Albert, was German, and that was a tradition that he brought to England. So some of the
Hmm.
British royalty were using Christmas trees before, but it didn't catch on because the royal family wasn't really popular until Queen Victoria's time. And then this was also around the time where there was a print media explosion in the 19th century. And so this very famous image of Queen Victoria and her family in front of a Christmas tree was published in Godey's Women's Magazine, I believe again in 1848, and then it became the must-have Christmas accessory.
Got it.
But we didn't start seeing Christmas trees in American homes until about the 1870s.
Hmm.
And that's, again, started seeing them. It didn't really become very common until several decades after that. And part of the reason is, again, information and trends were a lot slower moving back in those days. And if you had one, it's probably because you went into the woods and cut it down. They weren't a
Yeah.
commercial crop
Of
yet.
course.
That really didn't begin until around the beginning of the 20th century. And we see
Okay.
the first commercial Christmas tree lots in New York City and elsewhere. So again, this idea of the Christmas tree, you think, what could be more natural and ancient a tradition as that? But really, your great grandparents, depending on how old you are, it started in their time. It's
Hmm.
really new. It's very, very new as far
Yeah.
as those things go.
Okay. Um, I love hearing that because right, exactly. We feel like we could trace these traditions back to like the first century, and we cannot. These are
Exactly.
what's another tradition that's relatively new on the global scene that we may be thought were older.
Let's see. I think a lot of the foods that we eat,
Hmm.
for example, mince pie, it contains mincemeat, which you might notice doesn't actually have any meat. Well, it used to, of course, and that's something that I think around the 19th century it get phased out,
Yeah.
and part of what it used to contain is alcohol and preserved fruit. That was a way of kind of
Yeah.
preserving the food, and then eventually the meat got taken out, and it just became a fruit pie. So a lot of things have their roots in older traditions that eventually they change.
Yeah.
And that's the other big theme that comes out of my podcast, is that Christmas is constantly changing. So
Okay.
the set of traditions that we celebrate, it's not a complete collection, and it's not the final collection. So again, like Christmas for your great great grandparents was very different from what we celebrate. They would take a look at our celebration and sort of recognize it as Christmas, but not
Totally.
really. And we also have to assume that that trend is only going to continue, that
Mm.
5 generations from now, Christmas will only vaguely resemble what we're used to. And so it's kind of fun to think about, well, what changes are we living through right now?
What do you think?
Because we
What's your
certainly are.
guess?
Um, well, I'll back up a little bit and say
Okay.
part of the changes that we get are things like are obvious things, right? When a new movie becomes a Christmas classic and gets entered
Right.
into the Christmas culture, then there are the less obvious things. So in the 19th century, when rail travel became common, Christmas changed instantly. And
Mm.
think about why that might be. There was no other way to travel long distances. So Christmas wasn't really a holiday for homecomings. It wasn't a holiday for family reunions. It
True.
just wasn't, because it couldn't be. But all of a sudden it gets rebranded. If you moved away from home to go get a job in the city, now you could come home. It revolutionized transportation, where if you lived in the city, you could have goods shipped in and have a big Christmas celebration, so more people could celebrate. And then, of course, also this is a time during of increasing industrialization.
Yeah.
More goods are being factory made and sold in stores, and all of a sudden, because of all of these advances in transportation and industrialization, Christmas becomes a very, very different thing. Now think of what we're living through right now in the last 20 years, how you don't even have to go to the store to shop anymore. Online shopping
Right.
dramatically changed how we think about Christmas. Think
Totally
about
true.
in the last couple of years, telepresence has been around. Skype's about 20 years old at this point, I think. But the pandemic was the tipping point,
Mm.
where all of a sudden it became normalized and just
Yeah.
heavily socialized that if someone's not around, then, Skyping or whatever, Zooming with that person on Christmas is acceptable. Or
Yeah.
it's going to become part of how we celebrate. And you have to imagine the same was true, with the telephone or when that came out. All of a sudden now you can talk to people on Christmas that you couldn't talk to before. So I think that one area, the technology of online shopping and of telepresence,
Absolutely.
is really changing the way that we think about Christmas. I think also in the last couple of years, we're noticing people calling out old song lyrics like "Baby, It's Cold Outside," saying, "Oh, that's
Oh,
not really
problematic.
quite aligned with modern
Uh-huh.
attitudes." So I think we see those little kinds of changes
Oh,
too. I
yeah.
really think that as we become, a lot more of an open and accepting and diverse kind of society, or a society that places
Yeah.
special value on all of that stuff, we're going to see more of that.
Yeah. Good
And then
point.
we can think of, well, what are some new traditions? And let me back up there and just say, new tradition is obviously a contradiction in terms, because
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
literally
Yeah.
something passed down from one generation to another. So there's no
Sure.
such thing. But something like the elf on the shelf, where I
Oh,
know
good example.
it's a
Mm-hmm.
consumer product, and so it's hard to think of a tradition being born out of this one
Mm.
family's product. But we're at a point now where
Yep.
you have people who are old enough now to start having kids of their own, who grew up with this,
That's
never
right.
knew a Christmas without it, and are going to pass it down to their kids. And so either that specific product or ones like it, I think are now part of Christmas culture.
Yeah. Great example. I mean, you're so right. I'm thinking about how I used to shop for Christmas even 10 years ago. I mean, that's a second ago, 1 decade ago. I'd have to carve out a big chunk of physical time to be in stores, get in my car, fight the crowds, look for deals, know who had what. It was just a really complex sort of system of shopping. I did not enter a single store last year, not one. I stocked the entire Christmas under the tree online. And that's just in 10 years. In 10 years, it's completely changed the way that we shop, the way that we spend money, and even how much money we spend. Of course, we are watching those numbers just climb and climb the easier it gets.
Exactly. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Let me ask you this, because this is fun. What is one of the most absurd traditions that you have come across, and where did it originate?
Okay, well, back to this idea that Christmas is constantly evolving, right?
Yeah.
We can thank our lucky stars that a lot of traditions just aren't around anymore. They were either phased out or never made it over to America.
Like what?
And one of them is from Wales, and it's called either holming, Holming, or holly thrashing, which is the more
Oh,
descriptive term, and it is exactly what it sounds like, where on Christmas morning, the last person to wake up would get thrashed with holly by everybody else. And if you've ever seen like a live holly
oh,
bush,
just scratch it to pieces.
they are very spiky. So that's not a pleasant thing. And I think
What
it
in
was
the
also,
world?
and I'm not sure where it came from.
Oh
And it was also
gosh.
something that I think young men would go and thrash women who are walking around in the street. Apparently, some kind of
Okay.
courtship ritual. We don't see a lot of that anymore.
That's good.
But
That's
but
good.
also, Christmases of long, long ago were filled with all kinds of superstitious rituals and
Hmm.
monsters and threats of
Yeah.
child abuse and all kinds of things like that that we've gradually phased out. And so, another way that Christmas is always changing, this idea that it's completely benign and cozy and
Mm.
magical, that's new. That's really new, and we can be grateful for that.
Okay. That's weird and disturbing.
Hmm.
And I'll tell you what, I would be the first awake if holly thrashing was in my cultural vernacular. I'd never go to sleep. I was that kid anyway. I was meant to never be the last one to be thrashed because up until I was probably out of college,
Hmm.
and we'd go home still for Christmas. First one up. I mean, the sun is nowhere near the horizon. It is 5 a.m. I'm waking up my siblings, my parents. So I'd have been safe in that horrible Wales tradition.
Yeah, I think I'm the same. I was always the first one up.
Oh, couldn't sleep the night before. Still excited for Christmas morning. I love it. What's your personal favorite holiday tradition? Why do you love it?
A really good question. Because for me, it's I mean, I think it was the ones that my mom did. And so,
Sure.
decorating the gingerbread house or decorating the tree. It all changes once you have a child,
Mhm.
because then as you start to practice them, not only does it feel nice to continue these traditions, but it's also now you're on the flip side. Now you're the one responsible for making it happen
That's right.
rather than partaking in it. I should say once since I moved out to the Bay Area, one of my favorite traditions has become going to this thing we have out here called the Great Dickens Christmas Fair. And if you can
Oh.
imagine a Renaissance festival, but for Christmas during Victorian times, you get the idea.
Ooh.
And as a matter of fact, the same family that began the Renaissance festivals is behind this one as well. And everyone dresses up in Victorian garb and things like that and walks around with fake British accents. And it's really, really a lot of fun. And they've had to scale it back the last couple of years because of the pandemic, but I think
Yeah.
this year they're going to be starting it again. So that's definitely one of my favorites. And then making Christmas cookies. My mom
Yeah. Good one.
had one of those old-fashioned cookie presses that you make spritz cookies
Sure.
with, and
Uh-huh.
I scored myself one of those this year. So me and Baby Dash are going to be making some Christmas cookies together.
I love it. Oh yeah. Oh gosh. My memories of being in the kitchen with the sugar and the flour and the butter and the cookie cutters is just, and I can't even count how many. Guys, I accidentally wrote a cookbook that doesn't follow any rules and has some swears in it. It is for normal people who like/need to cook, but also just have a medium amount of dams to give, right? It'll especially work for people who want to read a recipe, definitely laugh, maybe cook. Okay, let me give you a little taste. It contains the following sentences among many more. Here is a smattering. Taste each stage, adjust accordingly. No one needs to know you double dip the whole time. They're eating this food for free. And the perfect hash browns come straight off the greasiest 50-year-old griddle at the sketchiest diner you can find. And if you don't agree, come fight me. On cold soups, yuck. Why? If I am eating something cold out of a bowl, it better damn well be ice cream. Or this one. This recipe is for spicy ranch, which is a bit kickier, but just leave out the cayenne and boom, regular ranch, just like the Pilgrims ate. Anyway, the whole thing is like that. Plus, the food is delicious, I promise. Plus, there's a photo for every single recipe like it should be. It's called Feed These People, and I think you're going to love it. It's not very precious, so jot that down, but it is fun and real and yummy, and for all of us normal home cooks out here feeding our people. Come and get it, y'all. Just head over to jenhatmaker.com/feedthesepeople to get in on this. That's jenhatmaker.com/feedthesepeople. I'm curious because you spend so much time and energy just thinking about Christmas, thinking about traditions and the arc of them over the course of history and how they continue to change. You know, in some ways, of course, which we understand, traditions invite us in to the story. We want to continue them. That is something we go, oh, I'm 100% going to do this when I have kids, and I hope they'll do it with their kids. And it's something about that thread through the generations it's nostalgic and it's sentimental. And at the same time, sometimes traditions press a button in us that makes us want to flip the script. We want to do something different. We want to change it up. We want to add something new or change something about it. What's your take on this? How do traditions like land for you? And what is it about them that sometimes inspires us to keep it, and sometimes inspires us to flip it?
Yeah, and I think when it comes to Christmas traditions, we're talking about annual traditions, right? These are different from other kinds where they're very, very much in your consciousness for a few weeks out of the year, then you kind of forget about them.
Yeah.
And that's really the power of them, is that when you return to them, it's kind of like putting on that comfortable sweater that you instantly feel cozy and warm. And like you said, it creates all of a sudden all the memories that go with it come back, and that whoever else is alive will talk about how they celebrated it with the people who are maybe no longer with you. So it does create this continuation of a narrative. And then I think to answer your question is, well, why do we want to flip the script sometimes? It's because we're continuing the narrative. Every year we write the next chapter in the story of Christmas. And I mean that on the small scale, you write the next chapter in your family's Christmas, but then collectively, like for the reasons we were just talking about before, with changing our behaviors and just what kinds of things we want as a culture for Christmas, we write the next chapter collectively as the larger Christmas celebrating community. And so sometimes it happens in ways large or small. Like I think when I make Christmas cookies with Baby Dash this year, almost certainly he'll want to do something or put a certain kind of sprinkles on them, and then that'll just become part of the way we make Christmas cookies. Other times you just want to do something completely different. And one example of that is when I was living in Massachusetts back in the early 2000s, my wife's family lived in New York. And what we would have to do is bounce back and forth every Christmas. One Christmas in Boston, one Christmas in New York. One Christmas we even did Christmas morning in Boston and then went to New York.
Wow.
And after a while we said, you know what? Why don't we just do our own thing one year? And we went and did Christmas in the Bahamas. And
you really flipped it.
And we rode horses on the beach on Christmas morning, and we celebrated this Bahamian tradition called Junkanoo, which is kind of a Boxing Day celebration, kind of a combination of Christmas and Mardi Gras with this big outdoor festival. And it's not the kind of thing I do every year, for sure, but I'm glad I got to do it that once. I'll never forget it.
I love that. And I like how you say it doesn't mean it's forever that we do something new that we can never return to the old. We spent 1 year, we got on a plane with all of our bags on Christmas Eve and went to Hawaii. Same kind of idea. Like, let's just flip it. Let's just do something kind of wild, something different, something new. And it's the only time we've done it, but it was so wonderful. And so I love the idea that we can change tradition even for 1 year, even if it's just annually. Okay. And then I'm curious, how does your wife do with all this Christmas stuff? Like, is she sometimes like, Brian, it's enough. Like, it's just enough. It's enough Christmas. It's October. Like, I don't even have a Halloween costume for Baby Dash. Like, just calm down.
Well, and that's why I started the podcast, because I was looking for like a low key way to celebrate my Christmas spirit throughout the year. And again, now that Baby Dash is here, we probably won't be putting up the Christmas tree on
Oh yeah.
Halloween.
Yeah.
We usually I would often take it down on Valentine's Day. I think we've kind of
I
scaled
love
that
that.
back a little bit too. So it's not quite as bad as it used to be, but there
Uh-huh.
were those moments where it's like, okay, Brian, one just for one night, can we not watch another Hallmark Channel movie? Can we watch something else instead? Can we not during the Christmas season? Anything in my community that's going on,
Oh,
any Christmas thing, we're always running around to it, and she gets a
oh,
little tired because she
uh,
loves Christmas too, but very few people love it as much as I do.
totally. I hope that you in your podcast world have run across the Deck the Hallmark guys. They're
Oh,
just
sure.
hilarious.
Yep.
Just absolutely hilarious. I have had them on the last 2 years. They just crack me up. I mean, it's all Christmas movies all the time, which
Hmm.
I put on in October. Generally, I know the date that it starts. I think last year Christmas movies started about like October 25th. I was
Yep.
queued up, ready to go. That's it. We're on a loop. They're all the same, essentially.
Hmm.
They're virtually all the same movie. And I don't care. I don't get tired of them. I don't care how kitschy they are. We do a party every year. I'm with you. Are you real tree or fake tree?
I go back and forth.
Okay.
So if I do a real tree, I prefer a blue spruce to the
Mm.
the fir tree. I just really
Hmm.
like. I mean, they're sturdier, and I think they look better. They smell better.
Uh-huh.
We've done artificial trees the last several years. I
Uh-huh.
think just because it's a lot more convenient, and you can just
Uh-huh.
fold it up and put it away for the year.
Yeah, totally. Same. I go back and forth. Are you the tree is sort of decorated thematically, like in a color scheme, and it looks pretty? Or are you like it's family stuff? It's old timey ornaments and whatever.
It is absolutely a combination of the two of those.
Yeah. Okay.
We oftentimes, when we travel, we try to get a Christmas ornament for every
Yeah.
place that we go. And so, but now we're at a point where we would have to have a separate tree for all of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So every year it's kind of, we take a look at everything that we have and we say, okay, this can stay, this can go. Unfortunately, a few years ago, when we still had a dog, she ate a bunch of old Christmas ornaments off the bottom of the tree. And while she
Oh
was alive,
no.
every year after that, we could only decorate the upper two-thirds of the tree for fear that she would eat them. So she chewed up a lot of these old
Darn
nostalgic
it.
ornaments that I have. And there are some that I have, but I just won't. They'll stay boxed up basically forever because they're just, irreplaceable and sentimental.
Yes.
So yeah,
Mm.
every year is different.
That's what I have too. When we moved out of the house, my mom boxed up. We got an ornament every single year, and I've done that for my kids too. That was a repeat tradition in our family, and we write on it. We know the year, we know the thing. So we got a box of all of our ornaments from every year of our childhood and adolescence. And for some reason that doesn't make sense, I still have mine in the same box she gave me, which was an old Atari box. It's
Oh wow.
cardboard. It's trash. I mean, I put it inside a good box for storage, but I'm like, it belongs in the Atari box.
Hmm.
So every time I bring out like a 1974 ornament, I'm like, it's precious. I'm overly sentimental about them. My kids know it. I've made them that way. And so the unboxing of everyone's ornaments, and everybody has their own box and they get to put their own ornaments on the tree, is a deal. It is an ordeal. And we ooh and ah like it's the first time we've ever seen them every year,
Hmm. Hmm.
year after year. And I put my tree up in October last year. And I'm not
Did you?
embarrassed, and I'm going to do it again. And so I love your love for Christmas. I love your podcast. I like how much
Thank you.
time and energy and interest you add to something that's so special to so many of us. I have one last question for you.
Sure.
And this is, I ask everybody this, all my guests, whatever we're talking about. And you can answer this however you want. It can be like sentimental and precious, or it can be absurd. And we get it all. So the question is, what is saving your life right now?
As weird as it sounds, it is having a 2-year-old who drives me bonkers. Um,
Totally.
like I said, I'm 48 now. He was born when I was 46.
Yeah,
And I have no other frame of reference for what having a 2-year-old is like. I don't know what it's like
sure.
to have a 2-year-old at 30, like most people do.
Yeah.
Um, and I went through a period of being nervous. I'm going to be 60 with a kid in high school. I'm going
Yeah.
to be, very firmly planted in middle age with this kid running around and driving us bonkers and refusing to eat, making a mess and all of that. But I wouldn't have it any other way. I mean,
Of
I
course.
can't imagine a life without it. I look forward to waking up. I go in and see him in the morning, and the first thing he does when he sees me is smiles, and it's just
Yeah.
like, it every parent experiences this, and
Yeah.
it's the kind of thing you can't imagine until you become one, but it almost like unlocks emotions in you that
Yes,
you
it
didn't
does.
even know that you were capable of experiencing. It really just kind of turns you into a different kind of person. So there are some times where I just
Yes,
look at
it
him
does.
and I'm overwhelmed with this feeling of love that it's almost like my body can't contain it all. I almost feel, I like literally feel like I'm
Yes.
gonna like burst or explode or something like that. Um,
Love it.
and it came a little later in life than it does for other people, but in a strange way, even though it's running me ragged, it's keeping
Mm,
me young and it's keeping
that's
me
right.
sane, keeping things in perspective, and just
Yeah.
really adding a lot more structure to my life in a way that you kind of you have to pick and choose,
Yeah.
the things you're going to do and the energy that you're going to expend. Kind of hard to have a podcast with a 2-year-old, but I think it's all part of one complete picture. So that's what's
That's
keeping
right.
me sane.
I love that answer. I too don't listen to what everybody says. Yes, two can be hard, and yes, you're busy, but two is magic. And I can't wait for you to have Christmas with Dash this year. I
Mm,
remember 2-year-old Christmas. It's different than 1-year-old. They're getting it. They're getting it,
yeah.
and it is wonder, and it is so dreamy.
Hmm.
So I think you're going to love this Christmas with your little family, and it'll be new every year as he gets older, and you get to experience it in a new, fresh way every year as a parent because it's
Hmm.
different. Now you're the creator of the traditions, and it's so special. And my kids are all big, and they're still just like absolutely dialed into our traditions. Like, when do we do this? When's movie night? When's tree decorating? I mean, the whole thing, it holds. And so thank you for coming on the show today. I have a million other questions for you, but here's the good news. Everybody can go to your podcast and they can listen to their little heart's content. Can
Hmm.
you just tell everybody before you sign off here where to find you on socials, your podcast, all the things, and your book?
Oh, sure. So the book is available for pre-order now at your favorite online bookseller. So Brian Earl, Christmas Past, the fascinating stories behind our favorite holidays traditions. Easiest way to find me is christmaspastpodcast.com. That has links to all my socials. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course, wherever you find your podcasts.
That's perfect. So we'll come to you with our Christmas questions or our software developing questions. Either
Please
way,
do.
you're the guy. You're the guy. Brian, so great to meet you. Thanks for being
You
on
too.
today.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
All right, you guys. So great. I love it when people they figure out their own little niche and they just drill down. I love that. Love, 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 love. I love getting behind what somebody else loves, what they are fascinated about, specifically how they turn it into a really kicking side gig or even their whole job. Like, nothing makes me more excited than that. I just love passion. And so I was delighted to talk to Brian. If you want a one-stop shop, you can go to jenhatmaker.com under the podcast tab. We'll have it all there. The show, the link, the show notes, all the links to Brian's stuffs, pre-order his book, all the goodies. If you would like to hear more, because this would be a really fun thing to kind of put in rotation during the season. His podcast, just hit play, learn something new, have a fascinating listen into his discussions, and just kind of a neat way to build capacity around a season that we already love. More to come in the non-traditions tradition series that we hope you're going to love. We sure love them. We love these conversations. We love putting them together. We love this whole series, really. So thanks for being such fantastic listeners. If you haven't already subscribed to the show, go do it. It takes you, I guess, 20 seconds to subscribe, and then our little show just shows up in your phone every single week. You just listen, never miss a single episode. It's so great to have you as subscribers. We also love, thanks for reviewing and rating the podcast all the time. Thanks for your feedback. We listen to every word you say. We read all your comments. You're the best listening community. We just couldn't have ever dreamed up a better one. So on behalf of Laura and her podcast crew and Amanda and I, we love you. And we love serving you. We love this series, and we'll see you next week.